I also want to just ask you to be a bit patient, because many of these decisions are beyond our control. So even if you are a club that's very keen to get back to what you're longing to do or what you've been missing, we just still need a few more days, even though the announcement has been made. Rachel, I just wanted to check, because I've got a sign saying that my screen sharing is paused. Are you seeing my slides change over?
No, I've got the one where there's the three of us.
Right.
If not, I've got...
I'm just going to try. Let me see
Yep,
if that... How's
got that one. Well, I can see, yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
great. So I apologise for that. I thought that you might not be seeing them. So that's the update. Everything that's going on here in Queensland is called the roadmap to easing restrictions, and this is just their latest little update. And this is what I was saying, but just remembering stage 2 doesn't mean an announcement on Sunday really doesn't mean that many clubs can open on Monday morning at 7 a.m, despite what you'd like to do. In terms of financials, what I want to talk about briefly at the beginning is just this very interesting perspective that there are some not-for-profit organisations that are actually thriving as a result of COVID, that are busier than they've ever been before. But they do tend to be groups that are around being of service to the community in terms of feeding people and housing people. And looking after people in crisis. For almost every other community organisation, it's a very challenging time financially, and that's likely to increase. One of the things that we need to think about is just what a return to normal really looks like. And I suspect that a return to normal is going to be very complex for all sorts of different organisations. I was having some discussions with U3A Network today about what a return to normal might look like for organisations that have a majority of ageing people in their membership, and the complex arrangements that you're going to need to make around social distancing, how people are going to participate, you know, how many people in terms of woodworkers, how many people could you have in that facility? How are you going to manage shared equipment? Are people even going to want to come back? And we'll talk about that as we go through some of your financial planning. But it's not all bad news. There is a lot of funding and grant support out there at the moment that I'm going to tell you about during the webinar, and hopefully try and point you in the direction where you can get some real assistance. Now, so a lot's changing right now, but there are some things that are not changing at all. So many of the legal aspects of money are not changing. One of those things is that you can still make a profit. You're just probably going to struggle to make a profit in this financial year. For most clubs, you may have to struggle with refunds, and we will talk about that separately. You probably had a loss of income, and for some clubs, like as we've seen in rugby, that could be a catastrophic failure. It really all comes down to some of that financial planning that we've talked about in the past at Council with the Treasurer's Workshop. So you do still need to make a profit if you can, and one of the reasons for doing that is so that you're able to build a fund to get you through these times. I've been able to do that with my not-for-profit. I'm going to share some very real financial reports with you all so you can see the effect of COVID on my organisation later on. There is, of course, normal law around making decisions not to spend money when you really don't have the money to pay the bills, or trading while you're insolvent. And those haven't changed. Corporations law contain those rules, and so does the Associations and Corporations Act. But they are giving everybody a little bit of wiggle room just at the moment around what trading as when insolvent really looks like. And that's because some organisations might technically be insolvent as they have JobKeeper money coming in and out and all of those things. Or they may not really be able to predict whether they're solvent or not, or their solvency may rely on grants and receiving funding that they've never received before. So what they've done there is just given a bit of leniency on the criminal aspects of trading while you're insolvent. There are a few complications that we need to wait for clarification on as well around handling our money. So those of you that are incorporated associations will already know about the levels of incorporation. I've said in the last 2 workshops, the Act is being updated right now, and just a little flag in terms of money. When the Act is updated in the next month or so, there will be a raft of changes in how we have to report our financials. Nothing to worry about now in terms of your COVID management, but certainly some specific items that will need to be highlighted in financial reports and different things later on after the change. For now though, if your turnover, all of your income is over 100,000, you have to have an audit. If it's between 20,000 and 100,000, you don't have to have a full audit, but you have to have an accountant review your finances. And if your turnover or assets is under 20,000, you don't have to have anything other than a treasurer's statement. What I just want to flag here is, while I'm going to tell you about all of the funding that's available for you to access, and I'd encourage you to do it, we still don't really have clarification on how that's going to be treated by the Office of Fair Trading. So if, for example, you're normally a level 3, you don't really have a lot of income coming in, but this year you secure some funding in recovery and it takes you over that limit into level 2 or level 3, hopefully they will waive the requirement for an audit if it's the only time and it's related to grants. But it is just something to be aware of in your financial planning. And again, your tax-free status is something we need clarification on as well, because taxation law says that we are a not-for-profit organisation and we don't pay company tax, but that's usually based on the on a self-audit that says we don't have to pay company tax because all of our revenue comes from members. And that's generally the way that most of us report. If we're starting to receive a lot of government benefits, that's not income that's coming from members. And again, we'd very much hope that the taxation authorities are lenient about that, but there's no real information available on that yet. And sometimes these things just take time to come through. JobKeeper payments, for example, have been problematic because for some time there was the same concern around work cover. And I will talk about that too for those associations that do employ. Just a little bit more on the law. We don't have a lot of time tonight. It's a whole other workshop, but I did want to talk about refunds because there's certainly a lot of discussion, particularly in sport at the moment, about when we need to refund. And it is one of the underlying reasons why sports are trying so hard to fit a whole season, winter sport particularly, to fit a whole season that might take place over 6 months into 3 months. And certainly part of that drive, at least, is a lack of interest in refunding anything to members who have already paid to sign on, coming sometimes from the state organisations and sometimes from associations and clubs. So the Australian Consumer Law is the piece of law that really guides how we do business with our customers, even though we're a not-for-profit with members. And essentially what that says about refunds is that if you've sold a product, which might be membership, and you are not able to complete the sale in the way that you advertised it, then you may have to refund. A consumer can certainly ask for a refund. So refund policy is something that you should all be developing and thinking about right now. If a member, we were talking about U3A, but it could be any group that has a large majority of members who are at risk in some way from COVID, then many of those members may say, well, I would have participated, but I don't feel safe to participate now, and so I'd like my money back. You need to have a clear policy about that will guide those decisions so that you're not making ad hoc decisions around who deserves a refund and who doesn't. You should just have a very clear understanding, all of you, on what you will refund, if anything. Now, if you choose not to refund anything, you can make that choice, but you may need to be prepared to defend it with the Office of Fair Trading. Let's go on to financial monitoring and reporting, which is, I think, one of the most important things that you can do right now. So we're going to focus tonight on budgeting and what you can do around preparing a budget that doesn't look like anything that you've ever done before in an unpredictable world and where the risk is high. So no pressure. I've come up with a few questions just to try and help guide you through. But the only thing that you can do is try and make some realistic assumptions. So thinking about what services or competitions you can offer based on your specific conditions, and they're going to be different. You could have 2 woodworkers clubs, 2 tennis clubs, 2 community organisations who do exactly the same thing, whose budget and recovery plan or restart plan will look totally different because they're in different buildings or they have different clientele. So first of all, thinking about your lease conditions is important, and that's, I suppose what I would suggest here is if you are a sport and it's been suggested to you that rather than refund, you just play 3 games a week, 2 nights of games and then a Saturday of games where normally it would just be Saturday and training, your lease may preclude you from doing that. So it's important to understand what you can and can't do. Talk to your landlord again about what you can and can't do if you're in a shared facility, because that's going to be complex as well. Think about the availability of your volunteers. So, and again, that's going to be different for every club. Can everyone contribute the same amount of time that they used to? Have they lost their jobs? Or do they have more time available? It could be negative or positive. How many of your members, as I mentioned before, will actually want to take part? So for many community organisations with older people, the feedback is they're being told their members won't return until there's a medical solution to the pandemic. So while they love what they do, they have health issues that mean that they're very much at risk, and so they won't be coming back at all. What expenses are unavoidable and that you have to pay, whether you participate or not, whether you offer activities or not, of obviously striking out anything that you don't have to do, and you'll see the results of that when I show you our financials. Thinking about increases in costs. So I would suggest that anything related to COVID recovery, like the cost of chemicals, hand sanitizers, masks, all of those things, gloves that are so important to us to have prepared for our members, are going to be at a premium if they're available at all. So not budgeting for life as it was, but what that might mean, and thinking as well about delivery times, because we've certainly been noticing as we're trying to get all this equipment together for a reopen, even in July, that delivery dates are spiralling out. And so if we need a lot of things, we might be challenged with that as we get closer to a reopen. We've already talked about refunds and having a policy there, but this is now thinking about the overall impact on the budget. and whether you're going to put a budget to refunds, we can afford to refund $2,000, for example, and no more, or whether you're not going to refund at all, because if you did, it would mean that you couldn't keep opening your doors, or if you're going to ask members to surrender their membership fee or delay their membership fee for 12 months, if that's something that might be necessary to keep you going. And then have a very good understanding of outstanding payments or bad debts. And again, this isn't only sports, certainly, but if you have a calendar membership year and normally people would have paid by March, you've got a lot of people that never paid because COVID happened before they got around to it. You can't assume that because people said they'd join or signed on to play, that they are actually going to pay the money, and you can't make them pay the money now because of that situation with Australian consumer law. So there's a lot of things there to think about. I wanted to tell you separately about insurance and other hidden costs. So this is going back to something I mentioned earlier around workplace health and safety. Some insurances are based on income, not the end of year profit. So we need to just be careful about that. And one of those policies is association liability insurance. So that insurance that gives us all the legal protection if someone sues us usually only asks what your revenue was, not what your end of year profit was. Now, again, there's not information available on that. The insurance companies that I've looked at haven't responded yet. Hopefully they would say you can exclude certain payments from that income. But if you don't, your policy may go up if you do take a lot of grants or a lot of funding. The good news, though, is that generally when they're thinking about these things, here's the work cover example, they've had to think about it, and they've said in relation to JobKeeper, it's really not a wage payment, it's money in and money out. So you can take whatever you received from that grant off your total revenue for the year, and then you'll be assessed on that. So we have to really hope that all of those things happen, but just being very cautious. I know you may not be able to read this, but I've sent this document through to council, and I've asked them to put it on the website where you can see the recording of this webinar and the slides, because I really like it. I found, when I was doing some research, and I think it's a great guiding document to help you and your committee really work through some of the issues. Pardon me for glancing off to the side. I've got a huge screen where I can read this well. So it suggests asking some questions around, you know, if we fundraise, are we likely to be successful in fundraising this year? Some of you may, some of you may not. Again, it's going to be different for every club. Have we identified where we can cut costs and how far we can cut them? Are we generating surpluses on a consistent basis? So in other words, every year, are we making a little bit of a profit to help build that fund to get us through times like this? And if we're not there now, you're certainly going to struggle to be able to continue to survive if the pandemic goes for a longer period of time. If we're struggling with debt, have we spoken to a bank? And I'm going to tell you about some excellent schemes that are out there, although normally I would never advocate for not-for-profits going into debt, particularly to get themselves out of debt. But there might be a path forward with some good advice to help you get through. If you're using money at the moment, what can you do to try and replenish that money as well? So I can see that there's a couple of chats. Okay, thank you. Council's just letting you know that those documents will be available. So I just thought it was a really good financial planning document that will help you think about the bigger things in terms of managing your finances. So budgeting is probably, my best advice is to try and do a budget in the next couple of weeks that's very cautious, that assumes anybody who owes you money won't pay, that assumes all of those bills that you can't get around you have to pay, and asks some members some questions as well about whether they'll be wanting refunds, whether they'll be interested in participating. And that's a catch-22 that I'll describe to you better, I hope, in a minute. So let's go on to reporting and monitoring, and then you might start to see some of the other issues that you need to be aware of right now. Recording your transactions obviously is very important, and I use this slide in all my financial presentations. Computerized or manual systems, it doesn't matter, but have a system. Now is absolutely not the time to be making a financial report that says these are the 7 checks that I sent this month. You really need a much better understanding of what's happening with your money than that sort of practice. So record what you owe and what people owe you, being careful about that. Use year-to-date reporting, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Maintain a loan out register of who's got what, particularly if people have taken things home over this time of COVID to work from home. Keeping a close eye on it because it can be hard to remember later on, and prepare policies, as I've suggested, on refunds and resources. Now is also not the time to be taking your eye off the ball in relation to fraud, because while everyone's under stress, everyone's under financial stress, everyone's experiencing anxiety for different reasons, all of these things can make making a bad decision a more attractive outcome. So just right now, I would be very careful about financial practices, who's approving payments, checking that they are real payments and that they're going to the right place. All of the stuff that is always important is even more vital now. There's some things that you can do in your contracts as well, that again, if you're having events or you're talking to sponsors or any of those things, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is to make sure that all of your contracts include what are called force majeure protections. And what that really says is that if there's a circumstance that's beyond the club's control and beyond the other party's control, that might be a sponsor, it might be a supplier or a venue, then everybody goes home where they started. So if you paid a deposit, for example, on accommodation, if you were going to an event or you were hosting an event, then that money would be refunded to you. Or the remedy might suggest that if it can't be refunded, that you can, without penalty, change the date of the event. So force majeure protections are really helping us right now, and I'll explain how in relation to one of our events. But that's just a general part of risk management, that every club should have those contracts. Now, if you want the wording for the force majeure clause, I'm really happy to share that with you. Some organisations do not like to have it included, but for us, we won't deal even with a sponsor if we can't have force majeure clauses in there, because for us, for any community organisation, if you think about it, if we take sponsorship, we usually spend it straight away. We need it generally. And it would be impossible if we had to give it back 6 months down the track because we said we would do something and we're not able to because the gathering rule says that's too many. In terms of your financial management though, you want to, again, do what I always recommend. So at least an original bank statement and a cash book. I'd much rather see you move to computerized accounting if you're ready. And that includes looking every month at a profit and loss year to date. So for the whole financial year versus your budget. I'm going to show you a real one next so you can see how easy it is to understand what's happening with your money. a balance sheet, which is everything you own and everything you owe. Outstanding debtors is people who you owe money to, no, who owe you money, beg your pardon, and outstanding creditors are people that you owe money to. And then you might want to include a cash flow and a bank reconciliation. If you're using computerized accounting or you've got a great treasurer, that should be fairly easy to achieve with a lot less expense than it used to cost. So I'm not sure if you can read this clearly on whatever device you're looking at this webinar on, but I am involved in a quite large not-for-profit, not a huge one, but if you could see this screen at the size that I can see it, what it shows is the figures for the month, which are in this first column here, the budget for the month, and then this is the year to date, so the whole financial year, 9 months of it, the financial year budget, and then this variance here. And what you'll see here is a lot of red. Now, the reason that I like these reports is that red shows us very clearly that this is income. So it means we had budgeted that we would make a certain amount of money and we haven't. I don't know if you can see the size of this. It doesn't look too bad, but when I show you the balance sheet, you'll see very clearly the effect of COVID on my own organisation. So let's look at the balance sheet now. So this is everything we own and everything we owe. I've shown you only the assets and only the bank account. And this is 1 year, this year, compared to last year. And as you can see, we've had to cancel 2 major events that are almost 70% of our revenue. And so the bank account this time last year contained about $250,000 more than it does this month. And that's the loss that's ultimately the loss in profit that we've experienced. So normally we would have earned $250,000, and this year we have lost $250,000 because we can't go forward with that event. Now that's catastrophic for us, but you'll also see that we have a little bit of money left. So we have about another 10 months operating expenses in the bank. And we're lucky to have that. We work to have that. So there is a general rule in not-for-profit that if you can have a buffer of around 2 years of your normal expenditure put away somewhere for just these moments, then you're doing really well. And that certainly served us very well. I know you might look at that and go, oh God, you know, $250,000 looks bad, but they've still got money in the bank and they'll be okay, and we will. That could be your version of that, could be that we expected to make $2,000 out of fundraising at Bunnings this year, and we haven't been able to do it because they're not doing sausage sizzles. And that's had a real impact. That $2,000 fundraising is the difference in your club, perhaps, between whether you can continue operations and whether you can't. What I'm trying to show you, though, is that this sort of reporting will really help your committee and your members understand exactly the financial situation. When we knew that we couldn't hold these events, we adjusted our budget. Otherwise, you would see that $250,000 loss explained there. So again, it doesn't matter if it's a $500 loss. If it puts you in the red and you haven't got the $500 in the bank, it's exactly the same problem. So financial reporting is very, very important now, and monitoring everything that you do. Well, that's enough work, I think, for you to think about in terms of can we even go back to normal, whatever the new normal is. Let's finish with some good news. So I want to talk to you about increasing your income. And ironically, I want to refer you to another great webinar that's on our community website. There's a recording on there I saw it through the week and thought it was fantastic. So it's about diversifying your fundraising, thinking about fundraising in a different way. And there's a couple of pillars on here that you may not have ever thought of. So obviously getting money from granting bodies and donations, if you're able to. You can't assume because you're a not-for-profit you can take donations, but you might be able to auspice donations through another organisation. Crowdfunding is one of those other things you might want to try, putting a plea online to get other people in the community to help you. Obviously looking at your memberships right now and maybe extending memberships for another year for free if you can afford it. You might have to increase your membership and ask your members to support you. Events is a really challenging one, as you've seen. And even thinking about returning to events is crazy. You know, we have a large event that includes social opportunities and things, and at the moment, well, we can't have dinners, you can't have people at the same table, or not more than a few. You can't have coffee breaks and social distance, and you need much bigger rooms that are much more expensive to be able to put people in front of presenters and things like that. Maybe looking at some sales that you've never looked at before to try and earn some revenue there, and of course sponsorship. But dealing with all of those, I mean, I just saw another email from a different organisation who told me that they had 7 major sponsors for the year, and all 7 of those major sponsors have pulled out because they're reviewing their own expenditure, and so they're not able to give as much as they wanted. So just in terms of fundraising, I think there's some really good advice here that I wanted to share with you. Really staying in touch with people who give you money at the moment. So that would be council, that would be state government bodies that might grant or give you money, but also anybody who you would all normally get money from. Keep those relationships really strong. Understand that they're as squeezed as you are. Ask permission of your members before you just decide to delay an event or cancel something and refuse to refund. I would strongly suggest that you ask them if it's okay to do that. And most of the time, I think if they can afford it, they'll be wanting to support you. But for some people in the community, getting $100 back might be the difference between eating this week and not. We really don't know. Think about moving online, and that might be a challenge for some organisations. There are other organisations that are thriving using that model. So again, it really depends on what you do and how you do it. I've said in the last 2 webinars, I really like the idea of moving to Zoom meetings every month because it's less time away from home and it can be easier. There's a bunch of people who prefer to get together. That's fine too. But maybe being able to earn some money by holding some sort of an event online. Might be an online auction and doing something that way rather than just having everybody together. So still asking for donations and prizes, but holding the auction online. Or hosting a non-event. I thought this was another great idea, which is really just saying that you send an invitation to a few people and ask them to make a gift or donation to the organisation because you can't hold events at the moment. And you might have some people who are happy to do that or who are financially able to do that. Finally, just keeping in touch, I think, is very important now, and we've mentioned that a couple of times already. I also thought that this was really good advice to share, and that is if you are successful in funding, in getting a grant or funding, then just carefully considering how coronavirus might impact your ability to deliver that kind of a thing. So if you were, for example, putting in a new kitchen because there was funding available to do it in the clubhouse, you can't assume that the project timelines are going to be what they always were. There's lots of delays in deliveries. You can't assume the costs are what they were before COVID. Some things are much more expensive, others are cheaper. So again, it's a great time if you've got the ability to manage these projects. There's funding around to do them, but it's not going to look like it did before March. And also just now could be a really good time to clean up some things, to clean up those financial things, to clean up the records that you've got, thinking about, do you have everyone's up-to-date phone numbers and emails if you have them, really cleaning all of those things, putting things on the cloud as we've discussed, saving that organisational knowledge, all really good things you can be doing right now. And try and focus on the future, but being cautious and managing the money. So let's talk about the support that you can get out there at the moment. I've given you a bit of information on a lot of different schemes, but there really is a huge amount of support if you want to apply for it. So the ATO, if you unfortunately do owe the tax office any money, they are letting you defer some organisations. So if you're GST registered, for example, you may be able to defer your GST payment. In fact, if you're GST registered, you may have received already a rebate from the taxation office, depending on your situation. You might also have received $10,000 or $20,000 if you employ anyone in PAYG refunds. So if you think you might be eligible for any of that, you can go to the Australian Taxation Office's website or speak to your accountant. They can be really helpful. If you do employ anybody, you've probably already registered for JobKeeper if you're eligible. But again, it is a good system, but it's very complex. So it isn't simply a matter of $1,500 comes into your bank and you send it right back out again to an employee, and that's all you have to do. There's implications to what they're doing for you, if they're doing anything, if you have to pay superannuation on some of it. Sometimes you might not. And so it is a complex thing to manage. The federal government has announced this boosting of cash flow, which is up to $100,000 for small and medium businesses, and it does include not-for-profits, happily, and charities. Anyone that employs people, this is for. So that may not be everyone who's looking at this webinar. I'll take you through it quickly. You can get a minimum payment of $20,000, and it's really just to help you get through this time. Minimum payment of $10,000 and a maximum payment of $50,000 for salary and wages and that kind of thing. So again, some good support there. If you do employ and you owe anybody superannuation, or you're a bit behind with that reporting, you've got an amnesty at the moment, so you can clean up some of that mess and get that all tidied up before the 7th of September, and you won't have to pay any penalties. There's loads of different grant programs that are coming out right now. So Indigenous Visual Arts Support Program provides some money if your organisation is in the arts. There's another $10 million being allocated to the Regional Arts Fund. And again, maybe you're not specifically in one of these regions, but you can put together a program where you could take that out to a region and be the recipient of that funding. There's emergency financial relief for individual artists. Again, if you're an arts organisation, and Arts Queensland Showcase program has had their funding increased as well. Finally, not finally, but just in this section, the Community Support Package is a federal government initiative, and it's allocated $100 million worth of support to 300 charities Those charities may already know who they are, but I believe there is some money left in this fund. And it's all around relief organisations. So if you're a not-for-profit in Noosa that is involved in that space, hopefully you know about that already. I like this. The Australian Communities Foundation and ACOS have put together an advocacy fund. So it's a little bit of money, not a lot of money, but it's a little bit of money to put together an advocacy campaign to talk to government about what you really need, and to pitch your projects directly to them. Finally, for youth, the Young Australians has developed a youth response fund to provide grants between $5,000 and $20,000 for initiatives that respond to how COVID is impacting on young people. So if you're a health-based organisation or you're working with youth, this could be something that you could look at to do a program that's funded rather than what you might normally do. I know that there's a great community radio organisation in Noosa, so journalists and radio stations, there's some funding around for that to help them get through and to help the journalists and presenters within those groups get through this time. And the ABC has put aside $5 million to help build content for all of their stations and to engage with local media organisations to do that. We've got the small business relief package, which not-for-profits are also available to apply for. And that's really working with your bank. All of the major banks are a part of this for loans for 6 months. And you must have less than $10 million debt to all credit providers. So I'm going to assume most of us are eligible for that. You need to be current and not in arrears with, you know, your finance payments and things. But your bank might be able to just help you get through the next 6 months with a loan that's underwritten by the federal government while you plan what your club's going to look like in the future. There is also the Small and Medium Enterprise Guarantee Scheme, which provides up to $40 billion of lending to not-for-profit and small businesses as well. Again, you access that through the banks. And finally, in terms of the things I thought might be helpful, and can I tell you, I think I've raced through 20 different grants and different schemes, but for every kind of community organisation, there's a fund at the moment to help in COVID recovery. In sports and recreation, they've released a couple of things. The first one is the Active Clubs Kickstart, and it provides $2,000 for things like hygiene supplies, operational costs around COVID, signage, all those sorts of things. Anything, even the replacement of food that might have gone off in fridges during the COVID period, that money is on a first in, first gets basis. So it's a very simple process, and if it's a sporting organisation watching this, I'd strongly encourage you to get online fast and apply for that money. The Fair Play vouchers are coming out again for young people to participate in sport, and there might be more people taking that up than ever if their families are experiencing hardship. And then there's the Active Restart Infrastructure Recovery Fund, which is grants for minor capital works for clubs. So if you've got a project that you've always wanted to get to and it's about a $20,000 project, then that would be the fund for you. Again, a pretty simple process. There are some things you need to have ready. You need to be registered, but a great grant. And Gambling Community Benefit Fund is, as ever, out there several times during the year with rounds of up to $35,000 for projects that you might be able to get busy with. And I suppose just something that came out in the news last night that hasn't been formally announced, although maybe it is while I'm talking, is an opportunity for people to employ specialists to help with renovations and things like that. Your club might be in a position to pivot and access some of that funding too. I've tried to give you an overview and some hope about what really is out there in the community, and we'll hear next from council about what they're doing. Rachel, if you've got any information, but if you've got any questions, now's the time to ask. I've blown through.
I'll just I can unmute Stephen and Alan. Can I? Oh, I think I can't seem to unmute you, Stephen. If you've got any questions. Oh, got you. And Alan, yeah, so just following up on what Leisa has advised there with council, we do have the eConnect newsletter that will be going out in a couple of days. Like, so just with all the information, it's been trying to keep everything up to date, and it will include a lot of those funding links. And this session is recorded, so of course we'll send this out once it's all uploaded, and again, it's got the links to all the funding. Yeah, so as Leisa advised, strongly encourage you to have a look and apply for those. Yeah, so very informative.
Thank you. It's
financial.
It's a lot to cover in an hour, but Alan and Steve, have you got any questions that are specific to you while you've got me?
I'm all good.
No, mate,
Yeah.
I'm all good at the moment.
I saw you writing down all your notes there, Steve. There's a lot to do, I suppose, isn't there, and get organised.
I suppose one of the comments I made last time, Rachel, was whilst you recorded the webinars, if you had Lisa's PowerPoint presentation,
yes,
you know, so you can just sort of zip through the presentation, because there was a couple of websites that she mentioned last time that